All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AbleNet virtual learning event hosted by Open Access. Today, we are thrilled that you have joined us to learn more about innovative tools and strategies to support our learners. So you can see you have the QR code and also a tiny URL that we'll put in chat for you. At Open Access, we are committed to accessibility and the principles of universal design for learning. And so, to make this presentation accessible, here are some strategies that we do. So, you'll notice we have simple backgrounds and high contrast text. You also had access to the slides. If you need to print those, you can. And then in the chat, there is the link to the tiny URL. We've also added alternative text. We'll talk about examples and non-examples. And please share feedback, put things in chat, unmute, participate throughout this learning event. And then just a little bit about open access. We are a statewide special education resource lead, and we are all about accessibility. So we say that we are where universal design for learning, assistive technology, and augmentative alternative communication collide. So on the home base, you will see our one pager, and this just explains what we do here at Open Access. And you can see that we have three tiers of support. Our universal supports are our website and all of our resources, so we encourage you to take a look at those. We also have targeted supports where we provide training in and coaching in universal design for learning, assistive technology, and augmentative alternative communication. And then we also provide intensive supports to districts across the state of California based on their special education indicators. So you can take a look at that one pager and learn more about open access. And then today, for your resources, we have linked the open access website, also the home base is here for you. And then we're going to learn all about the amazing resources from AbleNet. So their website is also linked. So we'd like to start off by introducing our amazing presenter from AbleNet today. Mallory McGinnis is the Business Development Manager for AbleNet. And we are excited to hear all about the wonderful technologies and supports that AbleNet is here to share with us today. And on the call, we also have our content lead specialist from Open Access. So Jennifer Wright is our AAC content lead specialist. Emily Desjardins is our UDL content lead specialist. And Mimi Zimlick is our AT UDL content lead specialist. So just a quick inclusive welcome to see who's here today. So in the chat, if you want to share your name, where you're located, maybe your role, and then also how familiar are you with AbleNet? And this is the second webinar that we have done with AbleNet. So maybe you were here last time and you've moved from a 1 to a 2. So if you're a 1, you've never heard of AbleNet before. A 2, I've heard about a few things. A 3, I use these tools and resources from AbleNet. And then a 4 is, hey, I can take this over. I know all of this stuff, so let me show you. So go ahead and introduce yourself in chat. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here today and taking time out of your busy day. And I want to pass it over to Mallory, who's going to share all things AbleNet with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here today. A little about me. Before coming to work for AbleNet, I was a classroom teacher, specifically working with students that have extensive support needs and complex communication needs. My experience with assistive technology really came to be when I started collaborating with my SLP and my OT and our PT. Without them, I would not have learned about AT because when I was in college, this was maybe one class, if that. So it's really exciting to kind of see all of the supports that are out there. And I was lucky enough to have an SLP that pushed into my classroom and an OT that pushed into my classroom and an assistive technology specialist and PT. And we all worked together really closely as a team to support individual students. And then that kind of evolved into how can I support my entire classroom and how can I also support my campus? And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Last week, when I shared, I really focused in on all of the resources that we have available on our website at AbleNet. So I will touch on some of those today. I'll go back and kind of remind you guys where to go and what that looks like because it will tie really nicely into some of the examples that I give today on how you can use assistive technology to support instruction. Again, we're working toward at AbleNet, obviously helping students get their voice, but also really helping them create or have access to everything that's going on in the classroom. So helping school districts and teachers and SLPs and OTs, anyone on an IEP team that are working with students that have extensive support needs, really helping make those environments accessible to all of our students. So that UDL approach that Leah had mentioned earlier. We are looking at enhancing classrooms for communication and access to the curriculum and access to activities that are happening. And we know that providing a lot of supports for teachers is one way that we can help support that here at AbleNet. And that's what I had reviewed last week. I will touch on those, but today I really want to focus on specific devices and different ways that those could be incorporated into the classroom. So I'm going to jump into that right now, starting with our talking bricks and our Big Mac. Before I get into that, though, I want you to kind of think about the classrooms that you see. Maybe you're a teacher and you have your own classroom. Maybe you're an SLP that's pushing into a classroom. Maybe you're an OT that's also pushing in. Maybe you're a paraprofessional that's supporting a teacher and working with students that have complex needs. What does that classroom look like? How are those students moving around the classroom? What areas of the room are they going to often? And how can we support communication in that way? And also considering how your teachers are teaching in the classroom. In my classroom, we did morning routine all together as a whole group. And then after that, we broke up into smaller groups. I did small group instruction. Some students were doing stations. Some were working with a para, kind of depended on the day of the week and the activities that we were working on. But that was kind of the structure of my classroom. And as I think about how I was able to use assistive technology, those were the two things that I thought. Where are my students going in the classroom? How can I support communication where they frequently visit those areas? And then how can I use AT to support the activities that I'm doing? So thinking about the talking bricks and the Big Mac. Talking bricks are recordable buttons. You can use them individually and you can use them together. You can use them for sequencing. You can use them for creating visual schedules because they're magnetic. They can be used in different parts of the classroom depending on how your room is set up. When students enter the classroom, typically they're going to say something or they're going to want to say something. Or when students leave the classroom, same thing. So putting talking bricks on the door frames could be a really great opportunity to give a student an opportunity to say something. Visual schedules, putting those on the whiteboard at the front of the classroom. If you're able to have two sets of those because they come as a set of three, putting your entire day on there where students can go over and press the button, hear what's next, know exactly what's coming. You can also individualize that for a student. Maybe a student needs their own set of talking bricks and you can incorporate it that way. If your classroom is fortunate enough to have a bathroom in there, maybe that's something that your students need and you're able to have that. Putting a talking brick on the bathroom door frame that just says, I need to use the restroom, or putting a talking brick in the kitchen area if that is something that you have in your classroom, for them to be able to say, I'm thirsty or I need a drink. Those kinds of opportunities for communication are really easy. You don't have to go in and recreate and overlay every single day. You don't have to go in and re-record all the time because they're going to be set up in those locations and students know where those opportunities are. When you're doing centers or stations in your classroom, having the talking bricks available that just simply say, I'm finished, I need help, or I'm finished, I need a break, what's next? Um, because it might be the case where you have students that are using robust communication or they have their own mid-tech device that's dedicated to them, but maybe when they leave their desk to go to a specific station, maybe they don't take it with them. Well, now they get to that station and now they don't have that device, so how are they going to tell you that they need a break? Having something like this at that station and available will be able to create that opportunity for that access. The Big Mac can be used in a very similar way. That is one recordable button. Really great for greetings, commenting, making requests. A lot of times it's often used for repeated storylines. So if you're doing a shared reading lesson and you know there's a common phrase that comes up in the book, going ahead and recording that and having that available so students can tell you the repeated storyline instead of you reading it to them. That is really a practical way that you can increase engagement for your students. And then also considering adaptive presentations. Not everybody does presentations in their classroom, and that might not be part of something your students do. But if it is, using a Big Mac for that can be a great opportunity for that engaging piece. For example, someone I met with a few months ago said that at their school, their fourth grade class was doing a wax museum project. And they had a fourth grader that needed some support with communication. And for that wax museum project, it was a situation where parents came on campus, they got to walk through the wax museum, and you would stand in front of that wax figure, aka the student, and they would press a button, and then that student would recite all of the facts that they had done research on. Well, the student that needed support with communication, they were able to program everything that they had researched into the Big Mac. So when a parent stood in front of them, pressed the button or activated that wax figure, the student was able to activate the Big Mac, and they were able to share all of their facts with the person that they researched. So that's a very simple way that you can adapt a presentation for a student, and it creates an opportunity for some inclusion there. And they're part of that entire process like everyone else is. Something else I'd like to note related to the talking bricks and the Big Mac specifically, if you have areas of your campus that your students go to frequently, like the front office or the cafeteria or special areas, these are great opportunities to kind of put some of these in those areas. And now your campus becomes accessible. I wish I had done this at my school, and I should have done it. I didn't think about it though until I was brainstorming with someone else, which is the great part about collaborating with others is you get all of these new ideas and how you can use things. But at my high school, we did on-campus jobs, and one of them was to go to the front office, collect the mail for teachers, and then we would sort the mail in the teacher's workroom. But sometimes when we got to the front office, my students either maybe left their iPad in the classroom, or maybe their iPad was dead, or maybe they just got down there and they didn't want to use their own voice because they got nervous and they got shy. But having something like the Big Mac or even talking bricks that just says, good morning, I'm here for the mail, is a super easy way for them to be able to communicate with the front office staff. Same thing if you have students that are coming in from a doctor's appointment, maybe they're checking in at the attendance office. They could have something there that says, good morning, I'm checking in. Here's my note, right? Something like that that can create some accessibility. You can do the same thing with talking bricks in the cafeteria, recording the different lunch menu items on there so students can make their own choices when they're in the lunch line. Maybe they're not able to carry their iPad with their tray. Kind of depends on how your setup is, but that's another way that you can create some opportunities for them. So just some very simple, basic ways. I will go over some of these are really great ways to increase engagement when you're doing small group instruction. The iTalk4 is a great tool to use when you are having students answer questions. Let's say you're reading a story and there are different characters in the book that you know you're going to be reviewing. go ahead and program those characters in the book, print out a picture of those characters, put those onto the iTalk 4 so that as you're asking questions and you're going back and reviewing, you can say, hey, who did this in the book? And then they can answer you. Super simple, super quick, super easy, because maybe those characters are not in their robust device, but they are available in the iTalk 4 because you recorded it. You can also record main ideas, supporting details from a story. Those are just very simple things that you can do for literacy review. Something else you can do with the iTalk 4, if you do have stations set up in your room, if you have a book nook or a reading area or a cool down area, putting an iTalk 4 there where they can make a selection. Maybe they have a peer partner coming in with them and they're going to the book nook and they're going to read a book and they're going to have their peer partner read to them. Have them select what book they want to read. They can use the iTalk 4 to do that. Obviously, they can choose their book as well. But maybe there's an activity that they want to do with their peer partner or with a paraprofessional or with the teacher. Make those choices, program those in the iTalk 4, and that's something that can live at that station. That way you don't feel like as a teacher you have to go in and re-record and create new overlays and all the things. Also something to consider, this is something that would have been really helpful for me in my classroom, recording steps to a task. We did a lot of pre-vocational skills at our stations that just required very simple steps. But having a visual with that output allowed them to be a little more independent when they were at that station, and it didn't require a paraprofessional to be there or a peer partner to be there to kind of walk them through the entire process. There was a good visual, good verbal output for them to be able to get the directions, do the task, hit the next one, do the task. So steps to a task could be a great way to use the iTalk 4. Also, you can use the iTalk 4 to prepare for the alternate assessments. I am in Florida, and here in Florida, we have to give our students the alternate assessment. And I taught high school, so we had the biology EOC, the algebra EOC, geometry, U.S. history, English 1, English 2, all of those, and they all had to answer questions. Granted, they were doing it in the way that was most appropriate for them, whether that was pointing or using their own device. But using the iTalk 4 to practice those skills could be really helpful. And if it is something that they need, then you'll be able to do that as long as the IEP states that. The iTalk 2, really great tool also for small group instruction. Very simple things can be recorded. Yes, no, I like it, I don't like it. For me, when I taught science, specifically biology, and we were working on living and non-living things, being able to just program living and non-living on that device, and then holding up images of different objects, different animals, different plants, or holding up figurines of those things, really allow them to quickly answer, yep, that's living, nope, that's non-living. Because maybe those words, again, aren't programmed in their robust device. So using that on the iTalk 2 is a great way you can do that. If you're working on identifying what math operation you're working on, adding and subtracting, very simple, very accessible way for students to be able to engage with what's happening in your lesson. Again, using the iTalk 2s at centers or stations, if you're someone that feels like that's a lot for me to have to go in and record for every lesson, put it at a center or station. Use it just like the talking bricks, but now it's just an iTalk 2. It can be the same way. I need help. I'm finished. What's next? Just another opportunity when you're thinking about all of the different areas that your students visit around the classroom. Where can you put something that just has some really basic communication in there and opportunities for them to say something and engage? All right. The next 3 devices I want to touch on is the Quick Talker Feather Touch. We have 3 different sizes, 7, 12, and 23. So the one you're looking at right now is our 12. The Quick Talker Feather Touch is really great, obviously for individual students, but also really great for teachers to model on. If you have a student that's using a mid-tech device, it is really encouraged that the teacher also have a device that they can model on. It doesn't have to be the exact same one, but something that they can use to kind of show students how to use it. They can also respond on the teacher device or on their own device. If students are using robust communication, like an iPad with a speech app, they can still use the Quick Talker Feather Touch because maybe it's just quicker and it's more natural. It's just another mode of communication. I think the biggest thing that happens with the Quick Talker Feather Touch, especially when you're thinking of how can I use it during instruction, is I don't have time to create an overlay for every book that we read, or I don't have the time to create an overlay for every small activity that we do and put really specific words on there. And that's okay. Sometimes just using the quick talk or feather touch during your morning routine, where you know you're probably asking the same kinds of questions every morning, can be really helpful. You can create an overlay for the morning routine, slide that in, make sure you're on level 1, and all of those words are recorded. When you move on to small group instruction, change out the overlay. If you know you're doing reading first, create a reading overlay because you might be asking the same kinds of questions: who, what, where, when, why, setting, those kinds of things. Put that overlay in, change it to level 2. All of those are recorded on there. Same thing for other moments of your day. That could be a way that you can use the quick talk or feather touch when you're thinking about how you can incorporate it. You can also incorporate it during stations that might have multiple students at one station, and they're maybe doing some play activities where you are working on communication and going back and forth. Maybe you have a student with an iPad, and maybe you have a student that doesn't have anything. Have an opportunity to put a quick talker there, and they can respond that way. They can use their own voice, or they can use that, whatever they feel most comfortable with. The Super Talker Feather Touch, that's the device that's in the middle. This is another mid-tech communication device, but it has some other options on it, meaning you can change out the grid. So currently on the screen, you're looking at 8 cells. You can change that to 1 cell. You can have 2, you can have 4, or you can have 8. And all of those grids are stored inside the device. But what makes the Super Talker really great is that it's switch accessible. So if you have students that need switch access, but maybe an iPad is not appropriate for them for whatever reason, the Super Talker is going to be the mid-tech device that you want to try. Because there is a skip ahead jack. It's called a skip ahead jack on the side of the device where you can plug in a switch and they can manually scan through every cell. But you can also plug the Super Talker in to switch it out to toys or appliances like the Power Link. So in a small group setting, you can make something switch accessible for students if they needed that. But with the centers and stations, maybe you at that book nook, you have a lamp set up, or you have Christmas lights over there, and maybe it's only turned on when a student is using it. So having the Super Talker plugged into that Power Link and having the Power Link connected to the lamp or connected to the light, you can have an option to have some voice output where you use the 2 cells and one side says turn lamp on and the other side can say turn lamp off, right? And now the students have some voice output, great cause and effect, and they're actually seeing what's happening when they press that button. So that's a great way you can use the Super Talker. Multiple levels, different grids that you can put on there. So it's very versatile. The little step-by-step. We also have a big step-by-step, which looks similar to the Big Mac, except this is a sequential message device. So instead of only one message, you can record multiple messages. Really great for shared reading. Maybe you're recording pages of a book so students can take turn reading parts of the book. Maybe you're sequencing events that happened in a story. Maybe you guys are working on a timeline, and so you've already recorded all of the facts in the step-by-step so students can take turns adding facts to the timeline that you guys are creating as a group. You can also record questions in there. So maybe like in my classroom, one of the things we worked on were interview skills. And I generally ask the same questions in an interview in order because typically that will happen when you go into an interview for a job. So recording those questions in there, and the student who is the interviewer can go in and they can hit the step-by-step and it'll ask the question to the person that's participating, and then they can answer. So that's something fun that you can do, but also for adapted presentations. I had mentioned this earlier with the Big Mac where a student was using it for a wax museum project. My students used the step-by-step when we were doing PowerPoint presentations in class. We were fortunate enough to have peer partners come in and work in our classrooms with our students every class period, which was so great. And so when we were working on a project and they were creating a PowerPoint, their peer partner would help them do their research. They would help them put the PowerPoint together, but they were still working on those skills for presentations. And then their peer partner, based on what their student wanted them to say, would record in the step-by-step for them so that when they got up to do their presentation, they could hit the step-by-step every time a new slide came up. And that was really nice. They loved hearing their peer partner's voice on that step by step instead of mine. It was age appropriate because it was their peer that was doing it. But using this for adaptive presentations is a wonderful tool that can really allow students to be part of that process and sharing, and they love it. Obviously, you can use it in math and science. You can record the steps to the scientific method, use counting forward and backward. For social studies, recording lists of different things that you guys are talking about. Maybe you're talking about products from around the country and what areas have different kinds of crops. Recording all of those on there so they can share that information as you start to put things up on the board or on a poster or on a PowerPoint. So the step-by-step, really great tool. You can use it as a single message device, but you can also use it as a sequential message device. And I'm going to show you some of those in the resource hub in a little bit. All right, the next things that I want to touch on are our activity access. So before we looked at communication, how can we set our room up for communication? How can we support communication during instruction as well? But now we're looking at activity access, that engagement piece. How can we increase that? As a teacher, it is really hard to get feedback when you have students that have a lot of support needs. And when you're doing instruction, that's one of the things that really helps you go back and see, okay, we need to go back to this, we need to do this again, or I can move on. So having this engagement increase will be so helpful. One of the ways that you can do that is with the alternate spinner. My kids loved the alternate spinner because it makes everything like a game. In the morning, you can use it during morning routine. If you flip that dice side over, it's plain white on the back. You can go in and you can write with a dry erase marker. You can put pictures on there, whatever you think is appropriate for your students and where they're at. But when you're doing morning routine, you can use it to take attendance, who's here, who's not here. You can use it to assign morning and afternoon jobs, who's going to do what during the class day. You can also use it for gameplay, like rolling the dice. That's originally what you see it for. But for me, during small group instruction, when we were doing shared reading or we were focusing on vocabulary, I would take our vocabulary words to it and we would review vocabulary that way because it made it like a fun game. I actually used it with the switch. So I would plug a switch into it because that tiny red button, it's easy to press, but some of my students had a hard time with that. And also, sometimes it's nice when you have a switch because you might have students that moving from point A to point B in the classroom can create some other things as far as behavior goes. So maybe having them stay in their seat, but you still want them to participate and engage. So you just hand them the switch and they can activate it from their seat. And sometimes that can solve some classroom management things. And I found that to be really helpful, especially with the wireless switch, because you can give it to a student that maybe is in a stander that's in the back of the room, or maybe a student that's on the other side of the room for whatever reason. They can also access that and still participate in that activity. If you're in science and you're working on making predictions about something an experiment that you guys are going to be doing, put different predictions on there, have them spin and let that be maybe their guess for what they think might happen. Record that on a paper somewhere. So alternate spinner, a great tool, wonderful idea for making choices, and it really just makes everything fun because everybody loves pressing a switch and loves watching things spin. So definitely check out the alternate spinner. There's a lot of great resources, which I'll show you in a second on the resource hub. The PowerLink 4, that's the device that's in the middle, really great for cause and effect, really great for using with cooking demonstrations. If you have students that have sensory problems and they don't want to hold a mixer and they don't want to hold press a button on the blender or anything like that, use the PowerLink. You can connect that device, that appliance to the PowerLink, and then they can activate a switch from wherever they are. They don't have to get close to it if it's too loud, or maybe they just don't like the way it feels when they touch it or have to hold it. So just pressing that switch can be really helpful. With the settings on the PowerLink, what's really nice, especially if you have students that don't necessarily, maybe they don't want to hold it while it's on, you can do different settings on the PowerLink. So you can have a direct setting turned on, which when you press the switch and let go, it will turn off, it'll turn on and then turn off. But you can do a latch setting where you turn on the switch, you press it, and it will go and go and go until you press it to turn it off. Or you can do a time setting, whatever you think is most appropriate for the activity that you're working on. But the PowerLink is also really great for enrichment activities. Maybe in the example I showed last week, they were making they were doing a car wash. They were making a bubble solution and they were using a mixer to create the bubbles. And then they plugged in a fan to blow the bubbles across the room as students rolled cars through the car wash. But you could also use that with a blow dryer if you guys are trying to dry something or wanting to blow paint across a canvas or blow a ping pong ball across the room for bowling or something like that. A really great way to do some enrichment activities there. Again, I had mentioned earlier using it with your reading stations with lights and lamps, starting and stopping music. If anyone still use an old school radio or CD player like that combo, that would be a great way that you can do that as well. The three devices on the right hand side, so the Hitch 2, which is our switch interface, the Jelly Bean switch, which is probably the most common switch that a lot of people know about. It's a wired switch. And then our Big Candy Corn 2, which was recently updated last spring. The Big Candy Corn 2 switch is a proximity switch. So if you have students that have a hard time with pressing down on a switch to activate it, they just have to get close to the proximity switch and it will turn on and it will activate whatever it is plugged into. The Hitch 2, though, is really great because it allows activities on the computer or maybe on the smart board to become switch accessible. And by that, I mean, in this example, using the Hitch 2 at maybe an independent reading station, or you have a book pulled up online and you want students to be in charge of reading it, and then you want students to be in charge of turning the page on the book or changing the slide on the PowerPoint, whatever it is that you're using. This is where the Hitch 2 becomes really helpful. I believe I showed this video last week, but I am going to show it again. I'm going to jump over in just a second to the resource hub. But this really is one of, I think, the most underutilized tools that we have, because when students are sitting for small group instruction, and maybe your teacher's teaching from the board, or you are a teacher that teaches from the board, instead of you being the one that always changes the slides or turns the page, because maybe you have students that can't come up to the board to do that, giving them a switch to allow them to do that really, really helps create that engagement and allows them to attend to what's happening. And they're like, oh, I know it's going to be my turn. I got to pay attention, right? Or I know my turn's coming up. Another opportunity for you to use your Quick Talk or Feather Touch or their own device to say it's my turn, right? Have them recognize it's my turn. And so you can program the Hitch to do that. There are modes already programmed on the Hitch, so you can use those obviously, but if there was something specific, like in Unite for Literacy, which I'm going to show you in a second, the video, you can program specific commands and you can do a sequence of commands as well. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. And then I'll jump into the resource hub. As I get moving over to the website, does anyone have any questions about anything I've gone over so far? Perfect. All right. Well, in just a second, the screen's going to switch over to the website. And I want to show you the Hitch 2 video. I think I might have showed it last week, but I'm going to show it again just in case. We sent out our August newsletter last month, where we included a flyer about the accessible classroom, different ways you can use things around the classroom. We also shared the AbleU, the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of switch access. If you haven't checked that out, I highly encourage you to go do that. Heidi Brislin does a great job of going over different types of switches, different positioning, and how you can use them during play and in activities that you're doing in the classroom. And then we provided a tech tip. So this is the one I'm going to show you that goes over using the Hitch for Unite for Literacy. So let me make sure my sound is being shared.
Hi everybody, today I'm going to show you how to program your Hitch 2 to be able to read and turn the page with one switch activation within the program Unite for Literacy. The first thing you need to do is plug your Hitch 2 into your laptop. Once you've done that, it will turn on. You're going to toggle between the modes, so you want to make sure that the blue mode or the bottom one is going to be highlighted. That's your program mode. You're then going to take your switch. Today I'm using our big red switch. I'm going to plug that into the first port because that's what I'm going to be programming. In order to program the Hitch 2, I need to plug in an external keyboard. So I'm going to take this keyboard that I have right here, plug this into the switch port on the side of the hitch. I'm then going to turn on my program mode. Once I have that turned on, I'll activate my switch. It will then start flashing down at the bottom. In order for the books to read in Unite for Literacy, you have to press the number 1 key. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm then going to press the right arrow to turn the page, and then do that combination one more time. The number 1 key to read, the right arrow to turn the page. Once I've done that and I've put in 4 keystrokes, it's automatically going to end the program. If you were to only do read and you did the number 1 key, you would have to activate the switch to turn it off. But since it's already turned off, I'm going to go ahead and switch that button down. I'll unplug my keyboard. Move that to the side. Now my switch is ready. When I have opened up a book for one of my students to read, or they've chosen a book that they want to read and we have it open, I'll then be able to activate the switch.
Show Me a Shark by Holly Hartman.
It will read and turn the page for them.
Have you ever seen a shark?
So that's one way that you can use the Hitch 2 in the classroom. Really great tool if you're doing anything on the smartboard and students are sitting around a table and they're watching you figure out what, and they want to participate. Having 2 switches, one to read, one to turn the page, and they all get a turn to do that. That's a super simple way that you can incorporate an engaging opportunity for them. Last week, I talked a little bit about our AT Resource Hub. I am going to touch on that for just a second. When we're on the main page, you'll see information about Quick Talk or Freestyle, AbleU, which is Able University, the Assistive Technology dropdown, and then you'll click on AT Resources. Again, that takes you to our Resource Hub. You'll find 4 featured posts at the top, but as you scroll down, you'll find a search bar. Just a reminder, on the left-hand side, you can search by topic. It will filter out activities that relate to that topic. But let's say you were using the step-by-step and you wanted to find an activity that incorporated that. You would type in step-by-step, and then all of our activities that use that device will pop up here. But I already told you that there is an activity in here about adapted presentations. So I'm going to go ahead and type in adapted because I know that's in here. When you click on Visit Page for Adapted Presentations, it'll take you over to our Markable Ideas page. Here it's going to go over the skills you're going to address, devices you may or may not need. So the Bluetooth Feather Touch is actually a device that is a switch interface, and it has built-in switches for it. Really great if you have students that are using iPads. If they're using iPads and they need switch accessibility, this is going to be the one that you want to use. It's a proximity switch as well, and you just go into the switch control setting on the iPad and set up a recipe to identify what you want the switches to do. But also the Hitch 2, if you're going to be doing a presentation on the smartboard like PowerPoint, you'll need the adaptive keyboard only if you have students that are going to be wanting to use that. But in order to program the Hitch 2, you will need a separate keyboard if that's something that you need. Step by step, it goes through, you're maybe not going to need all of these devices, but you may, depending on your population and the needs of your classroom. But it tells you how to prepare different pieces of the presentation, and then exactly what to do if you're using a PowerPoint. If you're going to use the sounding board app, which is where you would use the Bluetooth because that's on an iPad. If you're going to use a poster, here's how you can record things using the step-by-step. So this just gives you some great ideas on how you can adapt a presentation if you do those in your classroom. You might have seen a resource for the adapted KWL chart. Same thing, you just click on Visit Page, and it gives you different ways that you can use the step-by-step to be able to record on each level your what I know, what I want to learn, and what did I learn. All of that information will be there. So that's an example of that. I had mentioned earlier recording things for a timeline. So there is an activity in here about Martin Luther King Jr. This gives you all of the facts that you can record into your step-by-step as you talk about Martin Luther King Jr. So the holiday in January where we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr., this would be a great time to do that. You can tie in the alternate spinner using the step-by-step, the talking bricks. It tells you the other materials you may or may not need, how to prepare all of those devices, and then exactly what you're going to do with them, how you're going to use the alternate spinner to review vocabulary, how you're going to use the step-by-step to create your timeline. But actually down at the bottom, well, it gives you the vocabulary words to focus on, but it also gives you a bunch of facts that you can record in the step-by-step to use when you're creating a timeline. So that's just a very simple example of some resources that are available. Again, you can type in anything, alternate spinner, PowerLink, any resource that we have that uses those devices are going to be found here. So this will be a great tool for you guys to check out in addition to this PowerPoint that kind of gives you some ideas. On the home base page, Leah had uploaded for me the 101 ideas for sequential messaging and the 101 ideas for single message. That is an old resource, but it is still a good resource. It is literally 101 bullet points on how you can use different devices in different ways. It is a great tool. Check it out, see if it's something that will help you. But these are some different ways that you can use different pieces of this technology in the classroom. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces, right, is creating access for all of our students and making sure they have access to everything. And when you're looking at your campus as well, how can I support my campus? What does that look like? Can I put some things in the front office, in the cafeteria, in art and music, in the attendance office? What does that look like as well? I think that really does create that inclusive environment and everyone can use it. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute or you can put your question in the chat. So many amazing resources and different ideas on how we can make our classrooms more accessible.
I will have my information, I believe, is on the home base and in the PowerPoint. So if you guys have any questions or want to connect, I would love to connect with you, learn more about your programs that you guys are supporting and how I can support you guys as well. Share this information with your teachers if you're not a teacher, because that'll be some great resources for them as well.
And that goes, Mallory, if you go to the next slide for our intentional close, just take a second to reflect on all of the learning that Mallory shared with us today and think about what is your next step with AbleNet. So go ahead and reflect and then put in the chat kind of what are you thinking about doing next? Yes, definitely sharing this recording, sharing the resources with all of your coworkers. I want to dig into those 101 ways to implement. All right, thank you everyone for sharing. And then the next thing, the next slide is just that we would love to hear from you. So if you have a second, we'll put the link to our feedback survey in the chat. And let us know how today's session went for you. And then a couple things that we want to share with you. We do have our inclusive learning circles coming back this year. So please check out this community of practice where we really look at that synergy between universal design for learning, assistive technology, and augmentative alternative communication. So the link is there to register. And our first one is coming up, and we're going to be discussing AAC and vocabulary. I believe it's on September 17th. So that is coming soon. And then also, please stay connected with us on social media. Open Access is on Facebook, Instagram, and X, and we post Tip Tuesdays and Fact Friday and lots of other things in between. We share our upcoming professional development there also. So we look forward to seeing you on social media. And then the last thing, we just thank you for taking time to be here today. And thank you so much, Mallory, for sharing all things AbleNet. And we just appreciate you sharing this accessibility so our students are able to access. So feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions in the future. Thank you, everyone.